Good evening, everybody. Everybody who's watching or sometime in the future watching. Glad to be here with you. I'm Brian Wright, Principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, and I will be running everyone through a presentation pretty quickly to go over some of the ideas and things that we've been talking about and working on this week during the Planapalooza. We Tonight we're going to focus a lot on some what I'm calling demonstration areas. These are areas where we've actually drawn plans and pulled together inspiration images that begin to demonstrate some of the ideas related to the zoning concepts that we've been talking about. And now here's one thing to say at the beginning of this, which I normally forget to say, but the idea of this project isn't necessarily to come in and change all the things that are as they are today. One of the things we're trying to do is really focus on how to ensure that new development in the city is really in keeping with the comprehensive plan, the Connect Columbia plan, and is really giving the community the things that they're looking for, the types of places and neighborhoods and experiences that they're looking for. But you know, just as a side note, existing neighborhoods, those that are really built out and established, that's not really the focus of what we're trying to do here. So really, you'll hear me talk about a lot of new things or new ideas and all that. It's not that those new ideas are intended to be everything from now on and to change how everything is. It's really just that you know how it is now, so we don't have to really focus on that so much. And so the new ideas are the things that are noteworthy to discuss in a presentation like this. So as we go forward with this zoning update, we'll be working on how to make sure that we protect and preserve the neighborhoods and the places that you love already in the city, and how to make improvements with future development, how to make sure that it's going in the direction you want it to, and all sorts of things with the new zoning. So with that, I will turn on the presentation and share my screen. And Becky, if I forget anything, please feel free to jump in and remind me. All right, screen sharing. I was about to say a minute ago, this is like Christmas morning. You guys haven't even seen any of this stuff. So this will, for those at home, we have lots of people from planning department and engineering from the city. And this process is so open and transparent, they haven't even pre-screened our work. So if you hate any of it, don't blame them. It's all our fault. But hopefully we've been listening. There we go. All right, can you see my screen? Yes, all right, thumbs up from everybody. So, make sure I can advance. All right. So I mentioned earlier the comprehensive plan, or the Connect Columbia framework plan. This is the future land use map from that plan. And the idea is to focus on explaining what are the intended future land uses moving forward. Now, currently, because the zoning is out of date and not as current as as this plan is, this plan has a lot of importance when zoning applications come through and people are trying to figure out what they can do in the future with their property. Once the new zoning ordinance gets in place, this is important for sure, but it becomes less of of the main substance of a zoning discussion in the future, because the new zoning ordinance will cover the ideas. So for those who don't know and who are first timers to the Planapalooza, what is zoning? It's, the idea is that zoning is really, or the laws and rules regulations that it groups land into different areas or zones. You can see here this really colorful map is your existing zoning map, and each color represents a different zone. And within those zones, the zoning tells you what the rules are, what you can do and not do, or build and not build within each of those areas. The zoning doesn't necessarily cause anything to be built. It just permits or limits what can be built in each zone. So the things that we're going to be talking about tonight and the updates to the zoning ordinance, the new ordinance isn't going to cause things to be built. It's going to ensure that what is built is what you're looking for and adds value to the city for everybody, not just for those who live or work in the new developments, or not just for the developers, but for the city at large. Let's zoom in of it. So far, we have the website that launched in August. We've had some discussion forums on the website. There's a mapping tool on the website. We had the project kickoff on August the 31st, sorry, and the Planapalooza that's been going on since the 17th. We had technical meetings to talk about different topics on the 18th and 19th during the Planapalooza. There's the open studio that's been going on since from the 18th to the 21st. And then we had some show and tells on the 19th and 20th where people could pop in and virtually and see what we've been working on. And so we've been trying to be really open and make sure that this process is available and accessible to people. You notice the little guy there on the side, I'm calling that a cricket, says, "Where is everyone?" And you know, it's hard to get people to come and participate in a zoning project. It's not the most exciting topic to spend your evening talking about or thinking about. But ironically, at the end of the day, it's one of the most important discussions you can have about planning for the future. Because while the comprehensive plan is great and it sets a vision and the concept for the future, the zoning ordinance is really the implementation tool to make that vision a reality. So maybe everybody was content with the process with the comprehensive plan that moved forward, but as I said, the zoning now has to catch up to that, and you know, times change, and so even looking at, are there modifications in the zoning ordinance that the comprehensive plan will then need to keep up, catch up with. So we hope that in the future people participate more. We'll have more opportunities for input, and outreach will be coming in the future. And if we can ever get back where we get to meet in person, maybe we'll have an in-person Planapalooza, which is even more exciting to talk about zoning than on the computer. So anybody who is not participating or has not watched this broadcast in the future, but you know people who you think might want to get involved. It's basically anybody who cares about high quality development or creating walkable environments and neighborhood connectivity, mixed use centers, and having a variety of housing choices and civic space or community amenities. Anybody who is interested in any of those things, or even just protecting what you love, and making sure that you don't have to fear development in the future, then come and participate moving forward. So modernizing the code is one of the main topics that we're working on. So I mentioned in the opening presentation that we have a process that we call synoptic surveying. We go out and we measure and document things in the field and get on Google Earth and use GIS and mapping tools and really try to understand the essence or the DNA of the community, so that we can make sure that whatever standards and rules and regulations and dimensions and distances and things that we put in the new zoning ordinance will not be arbitrary. They'll actually be based on some of the neighborhoods, the streets, and areas in the city that you love the most, so that anything that's built in the future will reflect that pattern of development. So we want to document that in our synoptic surveys, and we've done that so far. We also did a zoning translation where we took the existing zoning and this colorful map that you have here, and it has very sort of conventional zoning districts in it that most of them focus on the use as the way that it separates one thing from the next, rather than the character, or how the place looks or feels, or those kinds of things that you really, as a person, when you're walking or driving through a city, that's what you really feel and understand is the character of a place. And so we started to consolidate a lot of those zoning districts, so we don't have such a confetti, a patchwork of so many different zones, because you wouldn't believe when you really look at your existing zones how similar many of them are. And so we then took those and started to focus on what is the character of those zones, and what are some character that you maybe don't have in any of your current zones, but have in some of your most beloved parts of the city. And we translated them into these character-based districts, and we made a new map. And you can start to see that the new map is a little bit more simple, and it's a lot more obvious in sort of how the structure of the city works based on this idea of character. And so that's what we've been working on. So some of the specific revisions based on our assessment that we did earlier in the project of kind of where the existing zoning is falling short or difficult, we've done these things. As a result of that, we've reorganized the sections. We started to group similar or related topics. I mentioned grouping the zoning of similar areas in the city, and this is another way of grouping and consolidating. We've made put all the definitions in a single location so that you don't have to go hunt for things every time you try to figure out what something means. Simplification of the overlay or the overly complicated text, and really just try to make it where it's easy to use, even if you're not a professional planner or developer or somebody who deals with zoning all the time. We want it to be easy for everyone. We have started to reduce or eliminate subjective standards so that there's not so much of a question as to what's going to happen, what's going to come out of a development process or a rezoning or a zoning process. We heard a lot of people say that there's a lot of uncertainty when somebody's trying to do development. And so that's partly because there are subjective standards in the current zoning. And so we're going to clean that up and make it easier. And once you don't have that subjectivity, you have a lot more predictable outcomes. And it's funny because a lot of people, might think that a developer would rather have subjective standards so they could do a lot of different things. But the developers just really want to know what the rules are, and so they can follow them. That's what we hear all over the country in our work. Luckily, we get to travel around and work in all kinds of places, and that's one thing we hear in every city that we work in, and we've heard it here too. We've talked to some developers as well, and the staff, planning staff and engineering love that too. The idea of not having subjective standards that they have to interpret and figure out how they should apply them. And then when it comes to the elected and appointed officials as well, it makes their lives a lot easier too. As I mentioned before, we've consolidated the zoning districts, which allows us to reduce the number of zones. And then we've made district standards or zoning areas that have an emphasis on character and context rather than just the use. Our mapping workshop, we got people to give us input about different areas of the city that they love, the areas that need some attention, areas for opportunities, and some of those started to direct us in our planning concepts. And we can zoom in and really get some specific ideas that people were talking about. And so you'll see some of these areas show up as we move forward in some of the plans. I mentioned that use is one of the things that tends to lead the discussion in zoning codes, zoning ordinances, and it's still there. You'll still have a use table and uses that are permitted in different areas of the city. It's just not the only thing and the most important thing, the first thing that you look at. It's not how we divide the city up with this new zoning concept. It's much more modernized. So we'll be incorporating things like frontage type standards, how the building meets the street, and which is really how you as a pedestrian or a vehicular or motorist experience buildings. So that's something that's really important to get that right. So there's some examples of what those start to look like. We'll also be incorporating building type standards. So there will be certain building types that are described and permitted. and it starts to simplify the process. Some examples of those. We'll have open space types. So rather than just saying, we want open space as a part of all development, it'll say, open spaces are parks and greens and squares and plazas, playgrounds, community gardens, etc. And you can incorporate, any of those things, but each of them has specific standards that go along with them, and they are permitted in different character areas. So we'll also have specific sign type standards that describe and define in detail how signage should work. And then we want to make sure that we're taking all of that and we'll be putting into an easy to use and clear zoning code. So here's our mock-up of what the cover may look like. And so it will be exciting and very graphic and easy for you to use. So now, I am going to shift and I'll put on my planning hat, my vision hat, and but I'll try to remember as I'm talking about these different demonstration areas to describe how the zoning is applicable and why these areas are relevant, what we're trying to demonstrate. So I'll start off though with a big idea. What we find in every city that we work in is those cities that are serious about tree preservation really have better results on the other end of development. There need to be standards in place that focus on preserving mature trees, but also standards that don't completely make a site undevelopable. And so there needs to be ways to work with the existing vegetation, but not have it keep you from doing the things that accomplish the goals for the future and vision. So that's a big idea. And so you do a little like this with the tree fences and preserving these trees, and then you end up with new development that looks like this. All those trees down the middle of the boulevard there are existing trees that were on this site, and then development has worked around them rather than just cutting them down. And you see the results are incredible. This is a new development. You can see in the back, the building back there is actually still under construction. This is a new development, and it feels like it's been there for 100 years because the trees are there and they've built close to them and worked with them. So we have what we're called the demonstration areas, and ignore that it says tobacco barn right here. You'll understand why in a minute. It's not supposed to be on this slide, but we have a few different areas. We have the mall, which we had worked on a plan for it back when we did the James Campbell Corridor plan, and so we'll look at that. We have a greenfield site here along Tom Hitch. We've done some planning along Riverside Drive to look at some interesting and fun things there. We have what we're calling North Riverside, so we looked at a piece of property here just to the north of Riverside. And then we have a few downtown areas, the tobacco warehouse that says here, Tobacco Barn, and then 7th Street. We have a plan for that area. And then we also have what we're calling the Church Village down to the south here. And so I'll describe these in a minute. So starting with the Tobacco Barn area, this is the barn as you know it now. And here is the river. I got to put everybody's faces up so I can see if anybody makes faces or smiles or cheers. Hold on one second. This is always the fun part. And so doing this online, it makes it hard because you can't tell what people are thinking. So we know that the city owns some property in this area. We know that other people own property in this area too. And so we've taken liberties and started to draw on things that we have no control over, the city doesn't control. So think of this as an idea for inspiration, and you can start to see how the zoning might be beneficial to property owners. This site is challenging because you have the river, and you got downtown just off the image of the square just on the road there. But we also have this little tributary or whatnot that leads into the river, so there's a lot of floodplain around here. Excuse me, as well as existing neighborhoods and things. And so how do we take some of these underutilized areas? You start to see, you imagine what this was historically, and there were old buildings here that were great and they've been taken down and turned into other things. The tobacco barn is, while it might be useful, it is not the most iconic building architecturally. And so, you know, we didn't feel too bad showing a whole new idea for how that could work. You also have the road that comes here. That's a bit of a squiggle there in the trajectory of it. So how to kind of work with that as well. And so this is the before, and here is the after. Now we know that again that the floodplain goes farther up into the site than we showed, and so we have you know, the thing that's great about when you do a plane like this is you can shrink and expand or contract however you need to do certain things. But what we tried to do is start with that with the waterways and really say, okay, well, let's stay off of there. We know that in the downtown area, except for on the other side of the river, on the riverside, you have the new park there, but you don't have much green space in the city right now in the more urban areas. So we wanted to try to create somewhat of a, a park system that is just a few blocks away from the square. And so we have a larger scale park that's more natural. It has a stormwater function to it. So this little blue blurb here is indicating it's, you know, there's more to it than this, obviously, but just indicating that kind of water is important. But typically, excuse me, you would want to design a park like this so that it actually helps to catch and to infiltrate some stormwater components to it. And then also we have an area here that is a pedestrian way that comes through, and that also has a stormwater functionality to it, bringing water down. It all kind of works together as a system. We have all the different colors represent different types of development. So we have everything from small scale apartment buildings. So there are fourplex apartments, sixplex apartments, eightplex apartments represented here. Here we have a duplex. Here we have row houses. We also have single family houses, you know, smaller size, medium size, larger size. And then these actually should be colored, single family colored. These are a couple of tiny houses that we threw in there. And the idea is to have a real mix of housing types. So that you start to address some of the housing needs in the city. We know there's some interest and desire for affordability, people who want to downsize but still live in a really cool place. Here you can see that we've created a block structure with the, you know, alleyways, so you have parking in the rear. These buildings face onto a little pocket park here, just like these buildings face onto the larger park. And then these buildings face onto this little really interesting sort of rain garden pedestrian way. And then these buildings face onto the street. And so everywhere we were laying out buildings, they were adding to the feeling of the character of this area. So some of the zoning concepts that you would find here would be related to the building types. We'd see the setbacks. We'd see that, you know, in this character area, you'd have a large variety of building types, whereas in some of the other character areas, you wouldn't have such a wide variety. And you could even have some commercial uses. So maybe this eightplex building actually has some commercial on the ground floor. The parking standards start to, you know, require the parking to, at least in this area, be in the rear. And then some of these civic spaces would be dictated by how the civic space standards are set up. You see also street trees and sidewalks as part of the streetscape component. So new development would incorporate that as well. So here are some ideas just to give you some visuals when we talk about some of, you know, row houses or things. And I'm going to show you a lot of images in this section, and a lot of these I'll actually refer to in sections down the road. So some of those row houses might start to, you know, look like some of these, or the Columbia version of them, as well as, and I like this image because a lot of these are very traditional looking architecturally, but these are a little bit more modern, but they still sort of have that traditional feel with the pitched roofs, and you can tell where the front is and the front door and all of that. And so there's a variety of you know, architecture that might show up. Here we're looking at the idea of live work. So having a shop on the ground floor and owning, you could own the whole building, but you might live above. So here's some examples of some live work buildings, and you could, some of these could have shown up in that plan that I was just showing you. I didn't mention this type, but it could easily be there. I mentioned apartment buildings, small scale apartment buildings. I know a lot of cities we work in, there's a real concern about multifamily because people are imagining giant apartment complexes, and it just, it really comes down to a character discussion. People, apartment complexes tend to not really focus on character. They're more focused on providing the apartments and providing parking. And so here, when you see apartments in a neighborhood kind of context, even in an urban neighborhood, you see that the apartments could look like this. So this might be a 6-unit building with unit. So 6 units in that building. This is an 8-unit building. And the thing is, you don't even know how many units are in a building necessarily because the way it's designed. So this could literally be sitting right next to a single family house. This might be a little bit more urban than having a single family house next to it. Here's some duplexes. Start to see, more urban duplex, a little bit more contemporary, a little more traditional. So I mentioned tiny houses earlier. So there's all sorts of, they're all the rage these days, and people love them. And they've been doing them for a long time. Most cities you work in, we work and we can find tiny houses that are old, historic ones. These happen to all be new. In fact, you can see this one being delivered. In this case, they were actually using it as an alternative to a trailer, a mobile home after Hurricane Katrina. And so you start to see the similarities, though, when you look at it in this context. It's long and skinny like a mobile home, but when you lay them out like this and start to create a sense of community and a neighborhood with them, it really has a different feel than a mobile home park. This is another little bonus we did. We talked with the city, and people have been asking, well, what can I do with a little infill property and things. We grabbed this other area as well. It's just down the street from the tobacco barn, just down the street from the square. And there's an existing a couple commercial buildings here, some bigger commercial buildings here, and then there's actually single family houses across the street. And this is just one option, one thing you could do. There's some existing trees here and some the vegetation that you'd want to try to preserve as best you can as well. And so here's an idea of how you could put a little development of townhouses. So this is a little row house court, and has a rear alley that comes through. There's parking underneath these. Then there's some additional parking here at the edges. The alley comes around. We've saved the existing trees here. These actually face in, so they have little stoops and they face into this pocket park, a little pedestrian pathway through here. The garage of this one faces into the alley, but it closes it up so you don't see the alley and the back of house kind of stuff going on. And then this little commercial area, the commercial building, we've now made into, you put a plaza out here, maybe a little civic structure, some civic art, and a little commercial space or pavilion here. And then we've added another business here, so to start to close in the alley a little bit. But there's a million different ways you could do this. These could be little apartment buildings like I just showed, or you could have some row houses and an apartment building, or some, just lots of different combinations in this area, in this zoning district. You'd have a lot of variety, and it starts to fit in with the single family houses across the street. And here's what a row house court looks like. This is an actual built row house court, not too far away from you guys. And so these all face in on this little green space, and it's really wonderful. I actually know the person who lives right there. And here's how the corner store could look. The commercial building that's there isn't 2 stories right now, but could be. You can have maybe an apartment above or a condo above and a shop down below. And here's some more examples of how corner stores could look. This is actually a 1-story little market here. Is great. And so I can imagine there's buildings there starting to transform. And it looks like the commercial building next to the row house court has actually gotten a new paint job recently. So that's exciting. So moving on to Riverside Drive. This is an interesting and unique area. So we have the square here. This is the tobacco barn we're just looking at, in the little infill row house court is over here. Riverside neighborhood is really amazing jewel in the city. It's so close to downtown. It's so unique, and it's, you know, wonderful walkable streets and kind of a mix of housing types. And there's churches mixed in, and schools, and you have the riverfront park, and and some commercial. And so what we thought we would do is, you know, everybody loves the residential components. We thought we might take a look at how we could improve some of the commercial areas to really make them into a great little neighborhood center, more so than they are right now, because you've got some really cool, useful businesses there. And how can we start to organize and think about them from a planning perspective in a way that begins to help it become a more discernible neighborhood center. So we've now rotated the map 90 degrees. I think, yeah, no. Yes, we did. Yeah, we did. Sorry. So now we've rotated. Here is the dam, and here's some commercial area right now, and there's also some commercial down here, and they are not really connected, don't really relate to one another. I mean, there's a street that connects them. It's just, you know, houses in between, and then the park kind of comes up and stops. And so we were trying to think about how we could make them begin to sort of work together and create nearly like the sort of a lightweight main street for Riverside. So we showed I'm starting to do some the light pink buildings are the existing buildings, by the way. And so we have, let me go back to the floor. There's a business here and here. So we showed the building staying here, but we actually pulled this up to the street right here. And now we're not necessarily proposing that those businesses go away, for sure, because it's rare to have these sort of neighborhood scale businesses. But we're suggesting that if they were to you know, be redeveloped or something like that in the future, they could, you know, either move into one of these spaces or whatnot. Now there's some floodplain issues over here, so that's a challenge. We'll talk about that in a second. But the idea is to start to consolidate some of the parking into, you know, sort of parking areas in the back, and use some of those areas up front for some civic gathering areas, and create some places as part of this commercial area. And then have a streetscape that kind of works together, sidewalks coming down. We noticed that some of the houses here are pushed back pretty far from the street. And we saw this as an opportunity to maybe carve out a little neighborhood greenway or park there. But, you know, these folks may love having to cut all that grass themselves. The idea would be that here, they still have the green space in front of them. It just means that somebody else cuts it, because now it's a park. But if you did that, you'd have a you know, sidewalk that comes along. They can access their, you know, porches and houses. So you start to see we've now just very surgically added little buildings here and there, filled in some spaces where there's some vacancies. And then as we get down here in this commercial area, we notice that there's this really interesting little development that has some residential uses in it. And we started thinking about how that might be really neat to have some other types of uses as part of that, and make this more of a little intimate neighborhood gathering space, and connect some of these areas sort of back of house. And we started looking for some inspiration, and we found some cool images of, you know, something like this might be, you know, a pavilion that could work with one of the existing businesses or restaurants, or something it's more open air and kind of lightweight, so you don't have to worry about flooding issues. Here, there's this the idea of some small little kiosk kind of retail to add some interesting little incubator retail space to build on what you already have. This is some little small businesses in Nashville, and they face in on this little pedestrian way. These are really cool. These little artists, they call them artist shanties. And so like each little vendor just opens up their doors, and people can come in and buy stuff. But there's like little, you know, civic spaces where you can have a picnic as part of it. And so we imagine that this kind of scale and intimate feeling with little twinkly bistro lights in the trees, and all that could be a part of this. We went to Leapers Fork and looked at some of the really cool sort of back of house development that they have back there. You have the great little Main Street area in Leapers Fork, but then behind it, there's other little outbuildings that have been converted. And there's like a log cabin here that's a turquoise shop and something here. And they make these little courtyards and dining areas that are, you know, kind of really unique and just super charming. Now you may go, what in the world is this building? This is the idea of how people can build in the floodplain and still make beautiful buildings. So this is actually an open air kind of market building, and you have space upstairs. I'm not necessarily suggesting that this building will be appropriate in Riverside, just to clarify that so you don't think we're crazy. But there, you know, if you were to do something to enhance that, or even just like kind of a market building, a pavilion, you could have some, you know, here's one in Venice, again, to show you how we know we're just totally out there and thinking about this. But the thing that's cool is there's a, you know, great building with, you know, commercial uses or things, and then have this space downstairs. And when you go inside, they actually have a fish market here every day. And the building is right next to the canals, and so it's totally floodable. And you see there's actually drains in the floor for how that works. So again, some of this stuff we just we get excited about ideas and we throw it out there. So anybody who's watching who hasn't met us yet, just know that we understand that this isn't Columbia, but these ideas might be interesting to explore. Now, we started also looking at an area north of Riverside, and it's kind of an interesting area because right now there is conventional strip center here, there's a drugstore here, but the river is right here, and here's Riverside as well. You have a grocery store and other things, but this is, you know, pretty outdated, pretty kind of, you know, end of life cycle development. You know, it's things of this age we tend to see redevelop at time. But we also notice that there's actually infrastructure that's being put in. And so what we wanted, oh, wrong way. What we wanted to do is look at kind of what's going on here, how it relates to this, how it relates to Riverside and all together, and how it relates to the river. And when we looked at the plans, the current plans for the development here, they're, you know, fine enough plans, but they seemed to not be very, what's the word I'm looking for? They didn't really utilize that much of the land, which you could say, well, maybe that's a good thing because we're trying to conserve, but, you know, most of the land over here is just farm field and pastures. And so we wanted to look at how you could incorporate the development program that they are showing currently and is under construction, if I understand correctly, and do something that really focuses on making a cohesive neighborhood that even works with this suburban commercial area up front. So this isn't to say do this instead or whatever. It's just as, you know, as an example to say, okay, well, you know what's planned and what's being built there, and here's how you could, you know, in the future on other sites, think about some of these things all together. Now, I know that's easier said than done because multiple people tend to own different parcels, and so it's hard to get everybody on the same page and coordinate. But hopefully the new zoning ordinance will facilitate that, those types of collaborations in the future. So anyway, here's what it is now, and here's what we drew. So what you can see is on this area up here with the commercial, more suburban strip center, we've done what we call suburban retrofit. And we have taken the huge areas of parking that were out front, and now we've reallocated that parking. We've started to put it in the rear, so that you don't have to look at the parking over the development. We've created a big civic space here, green space, a park with a civic building here that lines up on the street. Right now there's 2 signals, street traffic lights at these intersections, and so we just built on that and used those existing connections and recognize that if you have those signals timed correctly, that this actually can be a, you know, functional, safe feeling place, but having the park in front starts to buffer people who might be, you know, if there's an outdoor dining or cafe or something. It's hard to imagine right now, I know, that people would want to sit out next to the highway here, but you're currently doing a road diet in another part of the city, and so I have confidence that you guys can make the kinds of changes in the future necessary to get this type of development. But when you get this type of development, it has an amazing impact on the economics of the city in the future, because people are starting to look at, it's no longer, we're competing with the Spring Hill or other, nearby communities. It's like they can't even compete because they don't even offer something like this. This is a whole new way of thinking. So what you'll see here are mixed use buildings in this darker red. The lighter pink buildings are multifamily. Right now, I understand there's a proposal for multifamily on a piece of the project. So we showed how that could look, but we've put the parking in the rear, consolidated. Buildings are pulled up to the street as a part of a walkable streetscape. There's also row houses that are part of the existing plan that's being built and developed. You can see we used the roads that were already there, so we reused that existing infrastructure. So here, these yellowish buildings are row houses, so we started to incorporate them. And you see them facing onto these parks that I talked about before. Here we've left that the wetland and the floodable areas intact, and we've made them as part of a park. So all these buildings are facing onto it now and becomes a big civic amenity. And then here you have single family lots of different sizes that move up farther away from the center. So as you go from the center to the edge, it gets less and less dense. But every now and then there are still these moments where you have some things like row houses to define this park here. So this is sort of a neighborhood, more designed park. This is a more natural park. So that's how that works. Again, this isn't to say that what's being built is the wrong thing to do on the site. We just thought it was kind of a really cool moment because it had the river, because it was in such close proximity to so many walkable houses, and it had the suburban, kind of outdated suburban. We couldn't resist. So you may choose, we have some of these other ideas on other sites as well, but this was a good one where they kind of all came together. And you can have a lot of those mixes of different of housing types that I showed in some of the tobacco barn areas as part of this. So the next thing we're doing is moving over to what we're calling the 7th Street infill. So that is right now the post office is here. This is where you're doing your awesome road diet project, where you're making this into a more walkable, more pedestrian friendly street that still can move the traffic it needs to move. And so we thought this was a great site. Again, another outdated shopping center. But when you're making the improvements you're making now, this site will surely redevelop as a result of that good planning and forethought that you all had. And this is kind of what I meant a minute ago, where doing these kind of things, setting up zoning the way we're talking about setting it up, doing things like road diets, starts to facilitate development in the future. And it's, you're making a little bit of upfront investment for those long-term gains. So the other thing that's interesting about this site is not only does it have these beautiful historic homes across the street and even a park there, there's the existing neighborhood that's right up behind it. And right now, this street that goes through is really, in a lot of ways, just an alley for the back of house stuff here. There's new development that's occurred here that's detached houses, but more dense than you might see in other neighborhoods, because this is more heading in towards the downtown. And there's also a proposal on this site as well. So this is the current, the before, and here is an after. So what we've shown is your road diet concept being incorporated. We've added buildings along the 7th Street that are mixed-use buildings. They pull up to the street and have their parking in the rear, like we've been talking about. Having the parking in the rear, you may ask why I keep focusing on that. It is one of the most important things you can do when you're focused on creating a place of character, of additional value, that people, it's really the direction for the future. We haven't taken the existing shopping center out. It's, maybe it gets a new facelift, but maybe they take it out one day, but we weren't so bold in this plan. We left it as it is. And then we also added row houses or live work buildings here. I mentioned the live works before. Here you can see some of the small scale apartment buildings that I mentioned as well. We took that plan that's existing, or it's not built yet, I guess, but it's proposed, and incorporated it. And then the road comes through here right now, and so you have this little triangle with a sort of a lonely building sitting in the middle of the streets. And I'm not sure what's going on there. I couldn't exactly tell if it was a business or a residence or what it was, but nonetheless, what we've shown is that this road actually transforms and this becomes a green space. Now, as I said, we don't control this property, and so if the owner is watching, don't worry. No one's trying to take your building. This is a planning exercise to show how a vision might occur, and typically for something like that to happen, someone would purchase that and make it a park as part of development work. So the road that goes through has now been paved in the different paving patterns, so you can still have that vehicular connection, but it now feels like part of the park, and these buildings face right onto it. And we've created this great streetscape. And so now this development that primarily was intended to focus on 7th Street now actually starts to integrate and pull into the existing neighborhood, and make it part of a cohesive whole. So here's some this suburban retrofit concept, how this kind of works. So this isn't the site. This is a typical. So here's a shopping center. A lot of times you'll see out parcels out front, with here's a gas station and a restaurant, or what, a mattress store probably, and all the parking here in front. And so here you start to see over time you can start to infill in those areas. So here now we've gone from parking lot to sort of a Main Street feel. Here we've added a little bit more, so the Main Street is now continued on. We've actually added what we call liner buildings under the front of this shopping center, and so this starts to create a great little streetscape while still having the visibility and the doors and things for the existing business. We've also started to infill around the out parcels, so that starts to define that streetscape. Here we've now, if the market's there, and property values get high enough, you can start to have some even structured parking, and so you can start to cover that up with more infill and have liner buildings around the backside, and then you actually one day, people talk about that we won't even have a conventional shopping centers as we know, big box for sure, and so that site can be developed with a multitude of different housing types. And now a real neighborhood has started to emerge from what was just a shopping center. And if you notice, we also were doing some road diet stuff along the front here as we went. So you can start to see some of the conventional suburban uses can still address the street. So here's a street and here's a street. Parking in the back. So here's a gas station. You actually can enter from the alley here, and then you come through. Here's the gas pumps all in the back, and then you come out the other side. You can do the same thing. Here's a bank. So here's the tellers. So the lane comes around, goes through, comes out. Here's a pharmacy. You can't see it here, but there's the drive-through, a little pickup there on the back. And even a restaurant can have a drive-through component in the rear. The next area we're looking at, so we're kind of working from the inside out, if you're noticing a pattern here. So here's the mall. Here's the mall as it is today. Everybody says, oh, the mall's such an opportunity. We didn't want to spend too much time on it because we liked our old plan, so we just recolored it so it matches all the other drawings. And you can see that we've left 3 of the anchor buildings. The 4th anchor has converted into some mixed use, and the center of the mall now is a big civic space. So then you have mixed use. We did a road diet on James Campbell here, added mixed use and some infill buildings along. Parking goes in the rear. Here we showed some parking structures, and this actually starts to, because this is down in such a hole, the buildings here actually act as retaining walls essentially for the road up here, and so now it starts to not feel like it's in such a hole. And then we also showed a connection to the neighborhood back here, because there's a road that kind of wants to connect and the neighbors are already walking, so you can start to see some of that connectivity that we've talked about. And so the idea would be that so even this kind of area would be set up for that suburban retrofit. You see, instead of just the lanes through the parking lots, these actually could be blocks, in the future that had that progression that I showed you all a minute ago. So here it is today, and here's the awesome rendering that you guys have probably seen before if you've been watching planning in Columbia for very long. So they're the 3 anchors that I mentioned. Here's James Campbell, and now you can start to see the amazing transformation that this sort of mixed-use village from the old mall that was really underutilized. Where are we going next? I think we are going to Tom Hitch. So I think we're going to this site here along Tom Hitch Parkway, I think. Here is the site currently. It's a greenfield site. Just to orient you to, I think we turned the image. And what we wanted to do is show how new development on greenfield property could occur. Instead of conventional suburban development with a bunch of cul-de-sacs and every house and every lot being the same, we wanted to show how you could incorporate a multitude of housing types, create a true neighborhood feel to it, to start to work with some of the existing roads and neighborhoods around and look at preserving the existing vegetation that I mentioned. And so here is the before, and here is how a new neighborhood could occur. Along along Tom Hitch here, looking at having a neighborhood commercial kind of a node that would pick up on that drive-by traffic, but nothing too intense. We want to keep the energy and the focus for commercial in and around downtown and some of those closer in areas. But we also wanted to recognize that in a real complete neighborhood, you would have some commercial uses. So maybe some convenience kind of commercial, civic space here. Here you see some of these live work units that I mentioned. And then again, the orange are the smaller apartment houses, some row houses here and row houses around this park. And then all these other lighter colored, we didn't show each of the individual buildings on them, but like this, these are detached single family houses. And so these lots here would be detached single family. And you see we have everything from very small and narrow to really large estate lots at the edge, and even having connectivity across these greenways that we've preserved. Road would come through, and so you have this kind of feels like one little neighborhood unit. Then there's sort of another neighborhood here. Neighborhoods have centers, and so these parks will be neighborhood centers, and we tend to try to have some a little bit higher density around those. So here we have some row houses, so there's more people at the park. But then there's even these larger parks at the edges, little pocket parks all throughout. And then another neighborhood center here. This is a little tucked into the development, but there's another sort of a major road here, and so there could be potential for even some commercial over here. But it could just be there's apartment houses or row houses. But we thought that it was nice to keep kind of the agricultural feel, so we have it set back pretty far, and there's an existing historic house, I think, a farm here, so that's showing that being preserved, but tying into the existing roadways and really trying to have that connectivity between neighborhoods and save the existing trees. So here's some images of what a neighborhood like that could look like, minus the lake here. This is an example called Carlton Landing. It's an incredible new neighborhood. But what you can see in this image are these, parks that are preserved, these, different sizes of houses of different types that have, this wonderful character. It feels like a true neighborhood. Here they've actually incorporated stormwater in a beautiful and artful way into the streetscape. And these houses face onto that. They preserved existing trees. There's large houses and small houses and medium houses and everything in between. Here you see some of this neighborhood scale commercial. This is ignore the giant grocery store here, but you start to see this sort of intimate small scale. You see an example here where there's existing trees are preserved. You have people living above shops. Some row houses, you have some apartments here or condos, and even a fire station here. Here you start to see this idea of a cottage court, where you have some smaller houses that face in on these little pocket parks, kind of like the row house court that I showed earlier, but these are detached single family houses, just an incredible place. And these work really well. Also, seniors tend to love these because they have smaller houses that can downsize, and they have a lawn area that they don't have to maintain, and they have lots of sociability. People going and sitting on their porch, and you can see each other and say hello. And then the last thing we did, we called the church village. This is sort of the farthest south, south of James Campbell. What we notice is along the road here, there are lots of existing churches. So we call this Church Row. And we're thinking about, what does the church of the future look like in the neighborhood of the future? And can those things kind of all work together? So we picked a site that has some good connectivity. There's a road that comes along here that actually connects all the way over. So there's sort of a good part of the transportation network, so it's not isolated. And then we started looking for some inspiration. And here's the site as it is now. And we then did this. So this is what I called Church Row a minute ago. And we wanted to combine several different ideas all in one site so you could start to see. So here we have combined a church. And so here's a church building. And instead of having one big building, kind of the direction things are going these days is churches starting to actually start to fragment themselves a little bit while being part of a campus, and so they can actually utilize their property all throughout the week, not just on Sunday or Wednesdays. And so there's a cool project in Alabama where they first started looking at this idea, and it was really exciting for us to start to think about it as well. So you start to see the road right now actually kind of looks up to the hill. So this is up on a slope. And so we have kind of the main church building, and then we have some of the buildings for things like, Sunday school, or, some of the other sort of ancillary uses. Maybe even, like most churches these days of any size have like a coffee shop and some things. And so creating a little commercial node. So this becomes a center or a hub of activity, so people can come from all around and hang out here and just, be part of things. And it functions as a church. Then we have, lots of people who would like to live near their church. And so we have some of these row houses we've tucked in here. We have some single family lots of different sizes. And what we wanted to do is combine the idea of this new church of the future with the idea of a conservation subdivision, a conservation neighborhood, and furthermore, the idea of an agrihood. So you're incorporating agriculture into the neighborhood. And so we preserved, I think, like 50% of the open space on the property and left a lot of it in agriculture. There's also we've left that agricultural edge here, but this could be farmed. And you start to see, though, there's some placemaking going on. So there's a main building here and a park that's part of it. And then the roads kind of flow through like a farm road and connect in. And so these lots can have their own little sort of mini farms, have some community gardens, have some community barns. And so the church could actually be growing food that they're making available to people in need. So there's lots of things going on here, and this is just a quick idea showing how they all can come together. But I wanted to show you some inspiration. So this is a really cool neighborhood called the Waters, and here they didn't necessarily decentralize the uses in the church, but the church is sitting in the middle of the neighborhood up on this knoll in this prominent location. It's incredible, iconic, super beautiful. And so you can imagine something like that being part of what we're talking about here. Here are some of the, the commercial components, this sort of really intimate, down home kind of hamlet feel could be part of that. So, maybe this is the church offices above and the church coffee shop and bakery. And so on Sunday, this is where you get your coffee before the service. But during the week, people could actually come and get a good cup of coffee here as a revenue generating business. So the idea of creating a place that's for gathering and people can pop in and just hang out and sit around. This is really cool. You can imagine these might be the Sunday school buildings, and so they happen there. Some churches have. My church actually has some of the Sunday school classes in these sort of mobile units that it's not a super wonderful experience to go into them. But it was necessary for overflow. But here you can imagine nearly like those tiny houses that I showed you before. They're sort of organized around the gathering area. And so on Sunday mornings, these are Sunday school classes, but on the evenings, these classes, now these buildings can be turned into something else and can have some cool things going on there. as a sort of a transformation and maximizing the use of the space. Also, the idea of having micro houses, and some places we're working, they they don't have a huge population of homeless people, but there are some people in need of housing in an immediate emergency kind of situation, and so they'll have even these sort of micro homes as part of a church development. So the church kind of looks over it, looks after it, and makes sure everything's going well, and can provide some needs there. Here we're getting into the idea of some of this agri-hood concept, and so this is a cool article that came out talking about how agrarian urbanism, they call it, incorporating houses with farming. We were also inspired by the Magnolia over in was it Waco, the fixer-upper, Chip and Joanna. This is the silos. They have redone, and they've added all these little buildings, and they have multiple functions and little intimate spaces, and so we can imagine, sort of a church version of this as part of it. Here's some agriculture being incorporated into this little pocket park and amongst these little cottages and some commercial buildings here. This is a cool little development called The Patch. And even the parking looks good. It's like it's a plaza, but can hold parking when it's necessary. Here you can start to see some, new neighborhood with the agricultural component. This is another really cool one. And actually, this is all of these are actually canals that they've built in the past few years, and this is part of their stormwater system. So they're actually dealing with stormwater in a really elegant and beautiful way. And this is actually back to that cool Carlton Landing project I mentioned. So you see the houses of different sizes and shapes and agricultural components mixed in. So anyway, lots of big ideas, dreaming of interesting things, and trying to make sure that we've really thought about, how we can set you guys up as a really unique place for development, so that in the future, the development that you're attracting is development that is, one of a kind of really world class, and set you guys apart, while still allowing normal stuff to happen too. Remember, I said we talked about the unusual and the exciting stuff tonight, but normal stuff can still happen under the new zoning once it's written. Timeline and next steps, I'll try to run through this. So they'll have a recap. You can go online and participate in all the things that we did this week, and watch presentations and the technical meetings and various things. So don't feel like you've missed out. And we hope you'll go there, columbiaforyou.com, and the Planapalooza section. So there's the meeting videos are over there. You can click on each of them. The mapping workshop is there, so you can add to that map. There's the on the table exercises that's coming up September and October. Essentially, you just volunteer to host a group of people that you like, friends and family, whoever, and you can do it online if you want, or in person if you're comfortable with that and can properly stay safe. But we have a packet that you can download, and you really just walk through it with your friends. You don't have to know how to do anything except for kind of just help people have a good time and get people talking. You run through the packet and document the notes and send that in. And so do that for us. Be a huge help to get more input. Just to recap where we are, we had the kickoff several weeks ago, and here. And then we've been reviewing background documents, understanding the community character. Here we are, Planapalooza. It's called the design charrette in this table. And then we've been actually working on starting to draft some of the code during this process. That's why this line goes all the way back here. Some of the stuff that nobody really cares much about, the cleanup side of things and the processes and procedures and various things we've been working on. And now that we've been getting more understanding of the community and what people are looking for, starting to get into some of the specifics of what these zoning or character areas look like. We will create the public, we'll have a client draft where we send it to the planning staff to review, make sure we haven't missed anything or overlooked something. Then we will get a public draft created, and that draft will go out for the community to review, and everybody can give their input during a public review period. And then we'll incorporate those comments from that public review period into the adoption draft of the new code. And then it'll start the official public process. So basically everything up until this point is all bonus, extra process that we can get input and receive feedback. So we hope that you'll come and participate. For those who are watching this, thank you for doing so. I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing of my screen and open it up for discussion, questions, and comments. And have we blown your mind? Just all crazy talk? Anything exciting? Who's going first? Anybody? Anybody?
I'll jump out there, Brian. Thank you for putting all that work into all the different sites and playing all the different scenarios out from greenfield to infill. That was pretty exciting to see some of that. Some of those are properties that we're looking at today. So as you may call it, big idea. I saw a lot of things in there though that the City of Columbia could incorporate pretty quickly. A lot of things in there that make a big difference that I've never thought about on some of those scenarios. So I appreciate that.
That's awesome. Well, that's good to hear. I like that, you know, because a lot of times we draw these things to demonstrate concepts, but we hope that they'll be inspirational to people, that people who own those properties will say, wow, we can do this. This is amazing. And because a lot of times what we find is when we start to allow for, you know, this kind of unique places to be created, it adds a lot of value to the property. And so it's a real benefit to the landowner. In some cases, you know, allowing them to, you know, under certain parameters, you know, do some things, maybe more development than they might have done otherwise, because they are preserving some of these sensitive areas thoughtfully, or they are, you know, creating a new place that's going to add value to the overall city. You know, just looking at your existing zoning ordinance and some of these areas that are zoned in a more suburban way, even in an urban area, that is really, you know, hampering the redevelopment of those sites. And so I think some of those areas will have the biggest impact. But I think the other thing that's going to be really exciting is for people who are looking to buy a home, to move to Columbia, or people who already live in Columbia who are, you know, who live there for, you know, because it's their hometown, or because their job took them there, or whatever the case may be. A lot of times what we hear is people say, oh man, I just love so-and-so neighborhood. You know, it's usually like a historic neighborhood somewhere, but it's just too expensive. And a lot now what we, you know, when you have these new neighborhoods that have those things that make those historic neighborhoods special designed into them, then now you have, you know, another opportunity that might be more, you know, in somebody's price range, to have that same experience and quality of life, and that they couldn't have otherwise. And you know, that led them into more of just a conventional suburban neighborhood. And that's exciting. I think people get behind that. The other thing that I hope we'll be able to address and incorporate is, you know, sort of since COVID has come about, and also just with this online shopping and things as well, retail has been really struggling. And what we've learned through, you know, different experts around the country and what's going on in retail is that you know, a lot of people lost their jobs, and they don't have another prospect to go work somewhere else, and so they just say, well, I'll do my own thing. I'll figure it out some way. I'll bootstrap it. And so we're seeing a lot of people starting small businesses, even little small restaurants or whatever, but they can't afford a big restaurant space or a big retail space or whatever. And so some of those quirky little unique things that I showed in the Riverside Drive area, for instance, you know, could be incorporated in some of these other neighborhoods as new developments as well, and provide those incubator spaces for people to come in and get set up and started up. And as, you know, retail begins to come back and improve, as the economy improves, then we'll, you know, they'll actually move from that incubator space into a shop, and next thing you know, you've actually created a whole new group of retailers and businesses and restaurants and stuff that are going to now populate downtown. and start to fill some of those spaces even more. And so hopefully it all works together in a big picture way. And we need to make sure, so I'm so thankful that, that Glenn and engineering department and others have been involved throughout this process, because working the planning side of things, the land use and the character and all of that has to work hand in hand with the engineering and the transportation and the stormwater and all of that. And just for those of you who may not know or take it for granted because you are live in Columbia, not all cities, different departments play well together. You guys are really fortunate in that that there's an incredible connection through the different departments, and an understanding and respect for what each department does, and a real desire for them to work together. And so I know that in places like that, that's where you can have the best results, in these sort of what seems like big ideas can actually come to fruition. The fact that you guys are already doing a road diet. Now, I know those who are tired of the road being torn up, like, I get it, but when it's done, you're going to be so glad, and you're going to go, wow, okay, I get it now. That was inconvenient, but I get it. When I see cities that are already doing that, like, because a lot of times we're having to suggest those kind of things to people, and they've never even heard of it. Y'all are already on top of it, doing things like your arts district master plan and all that kind of stuff. Like, you're there. The elected officials that I've interviewed and talked to, and the citizens, and everybody's just so excited about the direction for the future. I feel like you guys are going to be unstoppable. So watch out, Spring Hill. All right. Anybody else have anything to add? Well, if not, we will call it a night. I appreciate everybody who's been participating. And if you happen to be watching this sometime in the future, thank you. Make sure you share this video with your friends. Hit the like button, and make sure we get the word out broadly, because at the end of the day, we're just planning for the future of your city. No biggie. Hopefully you like what we come up with. So I suggest you all participate. Have a good night.